Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Okay.
Today, we're going to be looking at something that I think a lot of people are going to relate to, even if they haven't experienced it firsthand. And that is, we're going to be diving into a personal account of a woman's relationship with a
Mm.
partner who exhibited some strong narcissistic traits. And we're going to be following her story from the very beginning all the way through to the long-term consequences to see what valuable insights we can extract for you.
That's right. And we're going to be using this woman's experience as a lens to really kind of examine the subtle signs of narcissism and understand its impact, and hopefully equip you with some tools to navigate similar situations should you ever encounter them. And it's important to note that while this is just one person's story, there are some common threads that we can uncover and discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to set the stage a little bit, we're going to be covering the phases of this relationship, starting with that classic honeymoon period, then moving into some changes that occurred after moving in together, and then the unique challenges of pregnancy and parenting within this dynamic. And then, unfortunately, we'll delve into escalating conflict, legal battles,
Right.
and the ripple effects that followed.
Yeah, it's a very complex journey, and we'll be exploring the psychological nuances at each stage. And I think it's important to say this deep dive isn't about diagnosing anyone, but rather about recognizing patterns, understanding the dynamics, and empowering you to make informed choices in your own relationships.
So let's start at the beginning. The account describes her partner initially as very nice, showering her with compliments, eager to spend all his time with her. He even went out of his way to integrate into her family events. It all sounds idyllic, doesn't it? What's happening beneath the surface during this idealization phase, as it's often called?
Well, that's the danger. It's often a deliberate tactic used by those with narcissistic tendencies to very quickly create a strong bond. So they might overwhelm you with attention, affection, and these grand gestures, making you feel incredibly special and desired. And this can be very disarming, making it difficult to see any red flags.
So it's not necessarily about the actions themselves, but the underlying motivation behind them.
Exactly. In a healthy relationship, those actions come from a genuine place of care and respect. But in a relationship with someone exhibiting narcissistic traits, they're often tools to gain control and fulfill their own needs.
Interesting. And that brings us to the turning point when they moved in together. The account mentions a shift in his behavior. He became irritable, easily upset, and his reactions to minor issues seemed really out of proportion. For instance, one night when she was exhausted from work, a few unwashed dishes sparked a major mood swing. What might be going on psychologically during this shift in the relationship?
Well, this is when the devaluation phase typically sets in. Once the narcissist feels they've secured the relationship, they might start finding faults, criticizing, making their partner feel inadequate. It's about asserting control and undermining their partner's self-esteem, creating a sense of dependence.
It's interesting. You'd think that living together would deepen the connection. But in this case, it seems to have triggered a very different dynamic.
Absolutely. And one way this dynamic often manifests is through attempts to control their partner's choices. For example, he pressured her to quit her stable job and become self-employed like him. This not only caused financial strain, but also made her more reliant on him.
That's a great example of how control can be exerted in these subtle ways. It wasn't a direct order. It was more of a persuasive push disguised as concern or support. How can someone recognize these tactics and protect their independence?
It's about being aware of those subtle attempts to manipulate or undermine your autonomy. Ask yourself, is this decision truly in my best interest? Or is it serving someone else's agenda?
Right. It's about listening to that inner voice and not dismissing any red flags or feelings of unease. And unfortunately, this pressure to conform to his vision continued even when she became pregnant. While he appeared supportive during the pregnancy, things didn't improve after their child was born.
That's unfortunately a common pattern. The narcissist might seem supportive during times of vulnerability, but this can often be a way to further solidify their control.
So even though she was entering a new chapter of life as a mother, his need for control remained a dominant force in their relationship.
Precisely. And that control extended beyond just her career choices. He also pressured her to work in his lawn care business, even though she wasn't interested in that field at all. Remember, he wanted to be the boss, further highlighting his desire for power and dominance.
Yeah, it's a classic example of how narcissistic individuals often prioritize their own needs and desires above those of their partners. Empathy is often lacking, and the focus remains on maintaining that control and power within the relationship. And this constant pressure, this need to control every aspect of her life, ultimately led to a terrifying escalation. During one argument, he actually spat on her, which resulted in his first arrest and a temporary protective order. What are the implications of such an action? And what does it tell us about the nature of this relationship?
Well, this incident really highlights the potential for violence in relationships with individuals exhibiting these narcissistic traits. Physical, emotional, or verbal abuse can be used as a means to maintain that control and dominance we've been talking about. And it's crucial to understand that any form of abuse is unacceptable and a sign to seek help immediately.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, in this case, the situation became even more complex because she missed the final protective order hearing, allowing him to move back in. And sadly, the violence continued, culminating in another arrest and probation. It's a stark reminder that protective orders, while helpful, aren't foolproof. And navigating the legal system in such situations can be incredibly challenging.
You're right. Protective orders offer a layer of legal protection, but they can't single-handedly change deeply ingrained behavioral patterns. What's important is recognizing the need for personal safety and understanding the resources available to support you through such a difficult process.
And even with probation and mandatory domestic violence classes, the account reveals that his behavior didn't truly change. He may not have resorted to physical violence again, but the manipulative tactics persisted. How common is it for someone with these traits to genuinely change their behavior?
Well, it's not uncommon for individuals with narcissistic traits to struggle with genuine behavioral change. True transformation requires deep self-awareness and a willingness to confront their own issues, something that they often resist. So they might adapt their tactics to avoid consequences, but the underlying need for control often remains.
This makes it incredibly difficult for the partner, who might be clinging to hope for improvement, while still grappling with the trauma of past abuse. It's a heartbreaking cycle.
Absolutely, and it becomes even more complicated when children are involved. This woman's account really highlights the devastating impact this environment had on their daughter, who witnessed the violence and that constant tension.
Even after a custody order was put in place, his manipulative behaviors continued, making it hard for their daughter to fully trust him. How do these experiences affect children in the long term?
Well, the impact on children in these environments is profound. They can experience emotional and behavioral issues, and those consequences can unfortunately linger into adulthood. It really underscores the importance of seeking support and creating a safe, stable environment for the child, prioritizing their well-being above all else.
It's a reminder that escaping a relationship with someone displaying these traits isn't always a clean break. The effects can linger, and the need for vigilance and strong boundaries remains.
Looking back at her experience, are there any subtle signs of narcissism that could have been recognized early on? Certainly. One thing that stands out is the rapid progression of their relationship. They moved in together quite quickly, which can sometimes mask underlying issues. It's easy to get swept up in the excitement of a new relationship, but taking things slowly and truly getting to know the person you're with is crucial.
So it's not just about grand gestures or whirlwind romances, but observing consistent behavior over time.
Exactly. Pay attention to how they treat others, not just you. Do they have a history of unstable relationships? Are they overly critical or controlling? Do they display a lack of empathy? These are all potential red flags to be mindful of.
It's about recognizing those subtle attempts to manipulate or undermine your independence. Like the pressure she faced to quit her job. That was a really pivotal moment in their relationship.
Absolutely. Healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, trust, and support. Both partners should feel empowered to make their own choices and pursue their own goals without fear of manipulation or control.
What would you say to someone listening who might be questioning the health of their own relationship or recognizing some of these patterns in their partner's behavior?
Well, the most important thing is to trust your gut if something feels off. If you're constantly questioning your own sanity or feeling diminished, don't ignore those feelings. Talk to someone you trust, seek professional help, and remember that you deserve to be in a relationship where you feel safe, respected, and loved for who you are, not for what you can provide or how you can be controlled.
That's powerful advice. It's so easy to get caught up in the whirlwind of emotions, especially when you're dealing with someone who is skilled at manipulation. But deep down, you know when something isn't right. It's about honoring those instincts and taking action to protect yourself.
Exactly. And remember, self-care is not selfish, it's essential. Prioritize your well-being, set healthy boundaries, and surround yourself with people who support and uplift you. You deserve a life filled with joy, authenticity, and healthy connections.
This woman's story is incredibly brave. By sharing her experience, she's not only processing her own trauma, but also potentially helping others recognize these signs and seek help sooner.
It takes immense courage to speak out about such personal and painful experiences, and she's really helping to break the stigma surrounding domestic abuse and encouraging others to come forward.
It's also important to acknowledge that her experience, while incredibly valuable, is just one perspective. We've talked a lot about overt narcissism, but there's also covert narcissism, which can be even harder to detect. How can we help our listener understand the difference?
That's a great point. While overt narcissism, like we've discussed, is characterized by that outward grandiosity, a need for admiration, and sometimes even aggressive behavior, covert narcissism can be much more subtle.
Yeah, it's almost like they're flying under the radar. How would someone recognize those more covert signs?
Well, think of it as a quieter form of manipulation. They might present as shy or sensitive or even victimized, but beneath the surface, there's still that deep need for validation and control. So they might use passive aggression or guilt trips or playing the victim to get their needs met.
So instead of those bold, attention-grabbing tactics, it's more insidious, underhanded.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's crucial to pay attention to how you feel in the relationship. Do you constantly feel drained or walking on eggshells or doubting your own perceptions? Those feelings shouldn't be ignored.
It goes back to trusting your gut.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing those red flags, whether they're waving in your face or subtly whispering in the background.
Right. And remember, narcissism exists on a spectrum. Not everyone who exhibits some of these traits has a narcissistic personality disorder.
Right.
It's about recognizing patterns of behavior and how they impact you and the relationship.
What advice would you give to someone who's maybe just starting a new relationship? How can they protect themselves and create a foundation for a healthy dynamic?
It's all about establishing and maintaining those healthy boundaries from the beginning. Clearly communicate your needs and expectations. Pay attention to how your partner responds when you set boundaries. Do they respect them or try to push back?
That's such a key point. Boundaries aren't about control. They're about self-respect and creating a safe space within the relationship.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to walk away if those boundaries are consistently violated. You deserve to be with someone who respects you and values your well-being.
This has been a heavy but incredibly insightful conversation. We've delved into the complexities of narcissistic relationships, explored those overt and covert signs, the impact on individuals and families, and hopefully equipped you with some tools to navigate these really challenging dynamics.
And while this deep dive was based on one woman's experience, remember, individual experiences with narcissism can vary widely.
If this episode resonated with you, or if you have concerns about your own relationship, please know that you're not alone. Please don't hesitate to reach out for support. We'll include links to resources, helplines, and organizations specializing in narcissistic abuse in the show notes.
Remember, knowledge is power,